everyone, my name is Daniel, I'm just a casual racer, and today we are in Le Mans Ultimate. I'm going to be showing you my force feedback setting for the Thrustmaster T248. So let's jump in here. Real easy to get into settings, and you can just adjust them on the fly in the middle of a session if you need to. Obviously we want to turn them on. We need to invert them for the T248. There's just some wheels you need to do that. Maximum torque as reported by the manufacturer, Thrustmaster, is 3.5 Newton meters. Obviously, some wheels, they vary, holding versus peak, but generally just go off of what you think the peak is going to be. And I would just rely on what the manufacturer's posted, most likely, unless there's a wheel that's maybe really low on the holding torque. But for this wheel, we don't have to worry about that. 90% gives us a little bit of headroom for clipping and things like that. So obviously, and also allows us to boost some of the other effects, such as going over the curbs later. We're going to want the minimum steering torque at 1%, so then we're also going to want a little bit of smoothing, set that at 1. So a little more boost on the low end. So you're going to always have an effect. If there's a force feedback effect, it's going to come in at least 1%. No increments below that. So with obviously a weaker wheel, that's kind of necessary to get the details out of kind of those lower detail areas, but it can also result in a little bit more spikiness. So I just found smoothing that out was a good compromise. This was what it was set by default for the wheel. I messed around with this. Seems like 60 works well for the steering bump stop degrees. Car-specific force feedback strength. We'll get back to this a little bit later. We'll need to adjust this for the Hypercars. This was at 10%, and this is 10% as well. This is the default. You don't want to go lower than this. You could experiment with going a little higher if you wanted, but generally I just don't find it does enough, so I just generally leave it at the default and begin to adjust the other settings to dial in what I want. Since they do more, and obviously this is set kind of as the default, so why am I going to change it if it doesn't do that much? Collision strength up to 140%. So, you get a boost when you run into something, which is good, and a little clipping isn't a problem. Curb pull strength. This is up to 130%. I know there can be a little bit of clipping with this, but there just wasn't enough of a pull on the wheel when I was going over certain curbs. And even with this, there still kind of isn't. I think it's something that will need to be adjusted. Seems like some curbs don't really recognize for this setting. So when you go over them, you don't really get that pull, which is a little bit unfortunate. It seems like some of the bumper curbs are that way, or sausage curbs, excuse me. So hopefully this is, if that's recognized more than this setting, maybe you could reduce it a little bit, but 130% seemed to work quite well. We have a curb update threshold, so that's 0.2. That worked well. Initially it was going to be 0.1, but by adding a little bit of smoothing, having it at 0.2 worked really well as well. Finally, steering torque sensitivity at 20%. If you go too much higher than this, 25, 30%, it just starts to get really grainy, and this is about as much as I was willing to put into the force feedback settings here. Now let's go back up here, of course, the car-specific force feedback strength. If you're talking about driving the Hypercars, you're going to need to go into this menu and boost it up to about 120%. This is where I run them, just because the force feedback for those cars is weaker. Hopefully that'll get addressed, and so you won't have to worry about that moving forward, right? But for now, it's something on day one, and probably within the first few weeks, maybe month or so, will be something you have to adjust if you want, unless you're comfortable with a little bit less strength for those cars. But generally, if you're going to be going back and forth between the Hypercars or any of the other cars in the games, the GT or the LMP2 cars, you're going to have to change this. 100% for everything else, 120% for the Hypercars. That's the best experience that I've found. So, all right, hopefully this is some settings that will make it more enjoyable and be more immersive when you play Le Mans Ultimate. But most of all, I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your week.